Welcome to the Undefeated Mind podcast with Coach Wendell. And this is episode 2. But I want to say that this is kind of episode 1 rebirth because the first episode I did was the beginning of this year, or it was actually during the summertime. And I've been wanting to do a podcast for a long time. So I've talked myself out of doing this for a while. But the goal of the podcast for me was I don't get a lot of time often with clients or just in general to riff on a lot of different things outside of training, outside of maybe putting content up. But as far as creating something that was like a long form of content where I could like really go in depth and like share certain things outside of the gym setting, I don't get to do that a whole lot with people. So I felt like this was a platform that I could use to share just like different things, different perspectives. Hopefully, or the goal is to, at some point have guests, but also get more interaction as far as like community and answering questions and different stuff like that. But I wanted this to be a platform where we could kind of just approach things from not just the tactical side of things as far as nutrition and working out, but also mindset things, the psychology behind that stuff, my own experiences, things that I'm learning or that I'm growing into, and just the different stages that I've been in, but also sharing my journey along the way of just the business side of things, because that's also something that I'm learning now, having my own thing going and building my own brand. So this episode, I kind of wanted to jump out the gate with something that I have been working on behind the scenes. For some people that have been following me, they have seen recently this. It's like an underlining part of the Undefeated Fit Life brand, which is Empower Her 365. So I have kind of started to niche down more towards women's health, and particularly women at that stage of like having children, so postnatal and premenopause, and then as time goes on, the more that I learn menopause. Because what I've seen in the gym and just through my experiences, about 90% of my clientele have been women, and they all fall a different spectrum, but the main group of women that I've worked with have fell within that spectrum. So you have around like 30 to 50s have been basically my main clientele. And it ranges from women that have kids, women that want to have kids, women that are having kids. So we have 5 pregnancies the last 2 years. And that's what really sparked my interest with this, because I start realizing that one, a lot of things change after you have children. I've experienced that in my own marriage, but also a lot of the information that's put out is put out for a younger crowd or somebody that hasn't dealt with life for a long stint of time. So a lot of the information that's put out is either put out for men or it's put out for somebody that is young. And I have noticed that, especially when it comes to nutrition in particular, there are just certain things where it's like you could be doing the right things, quote unquote the right things, but they're not right for the stage in life that you're in, or the approach is not working because of past history or experiences, things that you faced. So we're going to title this podcast, Why Your Body Isn't Broken, You've Just Been Following the Wrong Playbook. And I'm kind of going to highlight on some points that I'm going to hit on as time goes on at different episodes. So one of the problems that I tend to see a lot with this population is we do take into account age. You hear that a lot, but there's a big misunderstanding when it comes to hormonal changes, things like discipline, stress, just how to think about those things, metabolism, how that impacts you over time. And so one of the things that I like to say, or I like to teach my clients, or try to get them to have the perspective of, is when you are younger, so you're in your teens, 20s, maybe even early 30s, for some people it's early 30s, you can basically get away with eating and then working out. Kind of that whole concept of you can't outwork a bad diet. When you're younger, if you kind of have that on your side already where you are in fairly good shape, maybe you were an athlete, that works for you for a time being because your body hasn't dealt with the stress of life yet per se. Like it's kind of like you're still young, so your hormones are producing, they're producing at a very high rate. You can get away with not sleeping well, and you kind of just go about your business, right? In college, you know, we're pulling all nighters. You're out sleeping, you're out drinking and partying and different stuff like that, and you do that throughout your 20s, and then later on in late 20s, 30s, you start having children, you get married, and life starts happening, right? You have stress of work, stress of raising kids, and after having children, it's like your body's not responding the same. And so what I've seen and what I've noticed is the perspective that I like to paint is early on, right? I'd like to think of it as like you have a tub, right? And you're filling this tub up with water, right? And water is basically all the things that you're doing. So lack of sleep, but you're working out, you're eating what you want, you're just putting stuff in there. And over time, some of that stuff is damaging, so it starts damaging the side of that tub. So now things start leaking out, right? And what I start to see is as that stuff starts to leak out, what you try to do is you try to do the same things, but you try to do it harder. So you turn that faucet up. So I'm going to exercise more. I'm going to eat less. I'm going to go hard, whatever the case may be. And all you're doing is adding stress to that cycle. So you're pouring more, trying to dump more in there, but it keeps leaking out. So it's not giving you what you want. And over time, from a practical standpoint, you have age now working against you. So now, not only are the habits not lined up, but now you have age working against you, and now you have history of cutting calories, you have history of dieting, and now instead of you being young, having your youth where those things work for you, they're actually working against you. So now you are it's basically a vicious cycle, and they call it yo-yo dieting. They call it a fad diet, different stuff like that. You see just like these different things. And it's constantly this roller coaster of start, stop. And you do that for about 10, 15, 20 years, right? So now you're in your mid-30s, you're in your 40s. And it's like, well, in my 20s, I used to do all these things and I lost all this weight. But now it's like, I can't seem to get the scale to move. I can't seem to get it to go in the direction that I want to go. And it's not necessarily that you're doing things wrong. It's that you're not understanding first of all, the history of what you have done up to that point is now coming back, and now it calls for a different perspective and a different approach to this. And so what I see a lot of times is, for particularly this demographic of women, is undereating. So if you understand metabolism, right, there comes a point where I think we misunderstand a deficit versus starvation and undereating. A deficit is a strategic cut of calories. And what that means is that there's a point in time or a specific time frame where I'm going to cut calories. But what follows that is what you would either call a reverse diet or you coming back up to your maintenance calories. And a lot of this confusion comes from watching like people on the extreme. So like a physique athlete, right? Yes, they cut calories, but it's for a specific time to get a specific outcome. That's not normally a place where most of those people will live, which is why after you see them get off stage or once they retire, they gain weight back, because that's not a sustainable approach long term. So what you see what's sold to most people, specifically women, is this idea that I have to eat less because if I eat too much, that's why I gained all this weight. But in reality, you gain weight because, one, you're aging, and also there probably was a point in time where you weren't dieting or you didn't have the right nutrition. So you have those things working against you over time, or you're just less active because you had a different stage of life. Maybe, like I said, you were an athlete, or you're just younger, right? It's like your metabolism is primed and you can do certain things where it didn't affect you as much as it does when you get older. And so then what do? We run to things like cardio machines, and everybody's into their watches, and I think that stuff is great. But the way I kind of look at it is like, if you take a step back, people post their watches, they post all these calories they burn in these classes and training and all that. But then when you sit back and think about it, it's like, well, you're burning all these calories, but nothing's changing. So is that really the right approach? So it's not necessarily about how many calories you burn when you're exercising. It's what you're doing over time. And then also you have to think about it from a standpoint, are you fueling your body where that would be sustainable? So the thing to understand about metabolism is you have two sides of a coin, right? So you have calories in versus calories out, right? And normally we have this concept of eat less, exercise more. And that is true to a certain extent, but like I said, I think most people take it to the extremes of starvation, and they're not understanding that there's nuance with that, right? And understanding that if you have a certain diet history, that may not be the best approach right away. So what you see is understanding metabolism, calories in, calories out. Your calories in is basically the food you consume, the beverages you consume. Like, that's a general way to think about it. But calories out is a function of multiple things. So you have something called your basal metabolic rate. That's the calories you would burn just at rest doing nothing. So if you just laid in bed, those are the amount of calories your body needs to burn to keep your organs functioning, for your brain to function, for you to breathe, just to do regular functions, just to keep your body functioning. That's a big bulk of your calories. That can stem anywhere between 45 to about 60% of your total calories, just depending on the person. Then you have something called the thermal effect of food. Thermal effect of food is the amount of calories you burn when you take food in. Those are the amount of calories that are burned to break that food down for you to utilize it. Protein has the highest thermal effect of food, which is why it's extremely hard to overeat protein. But also when you start eating it, you feel fuller longer because it takes your body longer to break that down to be able to utilize. Then you have exercise activity thermogenesis, which is basically the amount of calories you burn when you're doing some type of structured exercise. So that's you in the gym. That accounts for the smallest percentage of calories you burn, which is about 5 to, it could be 15% of the total calories for that day. It depends on what type of activity. So like endurance athletes or the people that you see go to those extremes, they're going to burn a higher amount of calories because they're doing that thing for longer stints of time. And then you have the last part, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or what you would call NEAT. And that's the amount of calories you burn doing all the other activities throughout the day. So like me sitting here moving my hands, me in the gym walking around like training clients, or if you're in the grocery store, if you're in the kitchen cooking. So that could account for normally between 10 to 15% of your total calories. So those percentages are going to range depending on the person and what you do throughout the day. So the point here is that when you fall into the concept of under eating, those systems, if it's done for a long period of time, specifically your basal metabolic rate will drop, right? So it'll go from burning 55% of your total calories to dropping to about 40%, right? If that deficit is too extreme for too long. What comes with that now is if you've ever felt this, I'm sure if you think about it, you start noticing that you want to not move around or do much throughout the day, right? Like your energy levels seem to drop. So your NEAT is also going to drop. Your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So that can drop 5 to 10%, right? And now you start noticing that just like subconsciously or unconsciously, like you're not moving around as much as you used to. You kind of want to lay around. You don't really have much energy throughout the day. And then that starts leaking into your training, right? So now you don't have the energy and the spark that you had when you first started training, right? And this kind of starts into a vicious cycle. And what that's called in most circles is called being metabolically adapted. Most women fall into that faster than men. And my belief system behind it is, one, I think that women are more prone to go into starvation diets or like cutting extreme amounts of calories. But I also think that naturally you guys are consuming less calories anyways, and there's a certain baseline for an adult human. You guys are closer to that, like that bare minimum. So you guys kind of fall to that faster, but also you carry higher amounts of body fat, so you have lower amounts of muscle mass. These are just my theories. I don't think anybody kind of knows fully why women tend to become metabolically adapted faster, but those are kind of my thoughts. Obviously, hormones shift as you start moving more towards perimenopause and menopause and then having children. But those are just kind of my theories behind it. And also, I think that what you see, obviously, is starting to shift more. You're starting to see, you see men kind of move more towards lifting weights than women. They kind of move more towards cardio things. And when you're doing excessive amounts of cardio, that's a metabolic stressor you're adding to the body as well. So now you're adding stress to the system on top of cutting calories, which is a stressor to the system. So what the body's primary response is survival. It doesn't care how you look. It doesn't care about what you particularly want to see in the mirror first is cares about survival. So that you wanting to burn fat or have a flat stomach is not concerned with that if it's not getting what it needs at a baseline level for it to be healthy and function well. So I know I kind of riffed on that or whatever, but the point is that we don't want to get to a place where you're just cutting calories just to cut calories. It's a strategic cut where then we go into a maintenance phase, and then you go into maybe even what you would call a bulking phase, or you can call it a leaning phase. I know that those terms, a lot of those terms are like loose use terms, but they kind of all mean the same thing. Like you want to put on muscle, and I think that that's really the best approach, anyways, because the more muscle mass that you have, the faster or the higher your metabolic rate is, the more calories you're going to burn. So the reason being with the basal metabolic rate dropping down is a lot of times because we get so hyper focused on the scale starts moving down when you start cutting those calories, right? And so you feel like, okay, this is working, and then you kind of hit this wall. A lot of times if you're not looking at body fat percentages and different things like that, you are losing weight, but are you losing a lot of muscle, or are you losing fat, right? And some of the ways that you'll know that is like, again, like I said, your energy levels, your sleep, your strength will go down. You'll feel it in the gym, and just looking at your body composition, right? So it's like, do you have a really flabby physique, right? Because you lost a bunch of weight, or is your physique becoming more solid? Is it becoming more sculpt, right? So those are kind of things to look at. So muscle is costly. So if you're cutting in an extreme amount of calories and the protein level is low and you're not lifting weights, you're really not sending a stimulus to the body to try to preserve that muscle when you're cutting calories. So it's a lot of different things that I've seen, and I see it in men too, but just the demographic that I'm with, I see that a lot, where it's like the focus is so heavy on calories, and like, I don't want to eat a lot because I'm afraid of gaining weight, or I don't want to get fatter, or whatever the case may be. And it's like, well, you're not going to lose any weight if you're not feeding your body, because all it's going to do is hold on to whatever it is that you bring in. And then when you have those binge moments where you go out to a concert or you're hanging out and you start binging, it's like you're going to start putting more and more weight on. So my thing is, my approach right away is you should be lifting, doing some form of resistance training. I think that is super important, especially if you're going to go into any form of calorie deficit, because the goal is to burn fat and to preserve as much muscle mass as possible with the calorie deficit. Second thing I will always say is make sure that you're tracking, right? So you should be tracking your food in some form or fashion, right? When you're starting off. It doesn't mean you have to do it forever, but it gives you your patterns. It lets you know. You can learn, that's your way of learning about macros, how much is in the amount of food that you eat, because a lot of times we're unaware of like what we're actually consuming. Sometimes I feel like a lot of times we overestimate how much we're consuming of protein and other good foods, and then we overestimate the training side of things. And then in the gym, the focus should be on progressing, not necessarily how many calories you're burning. Yes, that's important, and you can look at it and it's great because it's like a motivator, but you should be trying to progress things in the gym as far as weight training, because that also sends a stimulus to your muscles that it needs to be preserved in order for you to, one, try to keep your metabolism sparked as much as you can while you're in that deficit. And then lastly, obviously sleep and those things, and I'll hit on those things at another time. Sleep and those other things matter. The last thing I want to say is you want to make sure that as you're going into a deficit, do you have an exit strategy, right? Because I think that that's also a problem as well, where it's like we want to sit in this deficit forever because we want to lose all the weight as fast as possible, and then it's kind of like the end. And it's like you want to have an exit strategy where it's like you did this thing in a healthy way, and then I have an exit strategy where I can come to a maintenance or whatever the case may be. It could be a maintenance, or you go into a bulk, or somewhere along the lines. It's like after 12 to 16 to 20 weeks, I have somewhere in there where I'm going to go into a maintenance phase. I'm going to go into even if it's a diet break for a period of time, and then I'll go back into, maybe you do come back into a deficit. Maybe there's more for you to lose. And another thing is, a healthy amount of weight loss is anywhere between a 0.5% to about 1% of body weight per week. When you start jumping up to those higher percentages, unless you have an extreme amount of weight to lose, it becomes a healthy amount of weight to lose at a period of time. And that's also a telltale sign that there's a good chance that you're probably burning muscle, not just losing body fat. So those are just that's me riffing into a little bit of detail to kind of just give you a different perspective of how to think about your weight loss journey. The last piece I want to hit on is so one of the things I've been working on, and we're going to kind of dive into in this podcast, is this system that I kind of want to approach step by step. So we're going to break this down into 6 phases. So the stabilized phase, where we're going to talk about sleep, stress, and consistency, because those are sometimes the big players underneath that are kind of messing everything else up, right? Because when you're not sleeping, that's stress you're adding to the system, right? So over time, that's a stressor. Then you have your own stress of raising kids, and if you have a career or job, you have that stress. Then you turn around and you're going to a gym and you're like doing all this like super high intense cardio style exercises. That's a metabolic stress you're adding to the system. So now the system is basically going to start working against you because it's a higher level of stress, and there's no form of recovery enough to the point where it's bringing those systems down. And then the last piece of that you run into is consistency. And that's normally the foundational thing that's underlining everything, because it's like you can have the perfect plan, you can have all the understanding in the world of macros and how to train, but if you don't do that consistently on a regular basis, none of it's going to matter. So that's the stabilization phase. Next is strengthening. So we're going to go into building muscle and metabolism, and we're going to kind of wax deeper into that. What does it mean to build muscle? What are the things to increase my metabolism, which is not really, you don't really want to increase your metabolism, you want to make it efficient. And then third phase is fuel. So we'll talk about eating enough. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do I know if I'm eating enough? How do I set my calories and macros if you decide that you want to track? What are some things I can do outside of that? Next part is shape. So what does fat loss really look like from a sustainable standpoint? And then the fifth phase is sustain. So how do I get to a place where I'm not regaining all this weight back? It's something that I can maintain and do. Even if I fall off track, I won't lose my all the stuff I worked for, because we see that a lot, right? It's like you lose all this weight, but then life happens, and 3, 4, or 5 months, a year from now, all the weight's back. And then last phase would be elevate. So it's more so the mindset stuff. So confidence and having the identity. And I think that that's rooted more in autonomy. So, right, it's understanding that you have choice, but also having the education underneath it, right? So I understand what it is that I need to be doing, why I need to be doing it, and how to go about doing it. And I know how to adjust it and make it work for me. So I want to definitely hit on those things. And from that, my plan is to create a system and a program behind that, right? So we will move forward from there. But I'm excited for this podcast. I'm excited to be able to share just a lot of knowledge and insight stuff that I have, things that I'm learning. I'm excited to talk about business things and different stuff that, day to day that I face, and the stuff I've learned as a coach and things that I'm learning along the journey that I feel like can help somebody else that's beside me, or they're behind or just starting off and moving forward, right? This is another platform to share the journey. So thanks for tuning in. Episode 2 of the Undefeated Mind podcast with Coach Wendell. See you next time. Peace out.